differs when it comes to these issues.
It's very important point. And this is something I've been trying to, through almost all economic indicators. Indian economy has to be understood as an economy of 28 vibrant state economies. And I think that's the reason why the Constitution also lays out health, education, in fact, labor market.
State issues.
Local, these are state issues, which means different states should be able to deal with them differently. India is a young economy, but it's also an aging economy.
Correct.
Which means that when we age, and we obviously are aging, we are going to be struck with this enormous problem, which we have not started to consider. For instance, do you know how many geriatricians are there in India?
Must be some very low number.
3. There are 3 geriatricians in India. One of them is a friend of mine in All India Institute of Medical Sciences. But it tells you how underprepared we are, particularly in a global market which is aging. So in India, I mean, the youth of India could be that missing sort of, labor requirement globally. Places like Japan and all, now China, should be opening their markets to Indians significantly.
Right. Kaylan, I'll come to you. One of the slides that Shamika showed was also the sort of the urban and the distribution of urban around the country, for instance. I'm guessing that you're beginning to see the same effects at Flipkart, right? I mean, your markets are no longer tier 1 markets, but you're getting a lot of activity in tier 3 markets and so on. So if you could just address that as well in your sort of larger commentary.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll just step back a little bit and answer your question as well. The company was set up in 2007, 2008. That's when we got funded and we started growing. The reason the company was set up, Flipkart was set up as a marketplace, was to solve access of products to the real India. So in 2007-8, if you lived in a tier 2, tier 3 city in India and you wanted to buy a Dell laptop, it was not available for you. It was more for the top 6 cities, top 7 cities users. So that was the vision with which it was set up. But of course, we started as a books marketplace. Of course, books is for the elite Indian because Indians don't like to read, they like to study, as all of you know. And I think a lot of us are, so all of us are probably a result of that. So that's how the company was started. Fast forward, if you just look at our marketplace today, we ship about a couple of million shipments per day. 60% of what we ship is actually in fashion, home products, and general merchandise. These are what we sell. Whatever sells on the marketplace, of that about 60% is where we gather data insights from all the users, work with sellers to come up with specific specifications, styles of what they should sell for the real Indian. So, for example, if a Nike or a Levi's enters India from the US, the obvious thing is that their products are over-engineered and overpriced for India. So we give them the specs and tell them that this is what the real Indian wants, and that's what is most of Flipkart today. So that's where we've seen bulk of the growth. And we continue to grow at about 60%, our transactions grow at about 60%. To your specific question, 68% of our transactions come from what we call as tier 2 cities.
And just to be clear, what do you mean by a tier 2?
Yeah, so in our own definition, the top 7 cities of India with a population of, I think, more than 5 million or is metro. Then the next 25 cities, I think, with a population of more than 1 million is tier 1, and then it's tier 2. So that's about 65 to 70% of all transactions on Flipkart today, growing at 60%. And I think to that extent, we have gained from the digitization slide which Shamika shared. When we started off, the internet user base in the country was 3 million people, and that too was mostly people searching for information, people on emails. There was a travel platform, so people used to buy airline tickets. This was it. Today, the country has 600 million internet users, growing very rapidly. And the upside opportunity from there, because of which I believe will continue to grow at those rates, is if you just look at real e-commerce, classified as people who have transacted for more than 4 or 5 times. The more serious e-commerce users who have converted to e-commerce is less than 50 million. So of the 600 million funnel of internet users, there is only 50 million users who actually transacted more than 4 or 5 times. So we are confident that we continue to grow at these kind of rates purely because of adoption and access.
So, and I don't know if you have an answer to this necessarily, but all of us probably come from similar backgrounds. What has surprised you? I mean, what are some of the insights that you've gained from running Flipkart? I mean, something that you didn't know earlier, but you know now about the Indian consumer, for instance.
See, just when we think that we've come up with the country's biggest disruption, we are surprised that in 2 years' time, that entire thing is behind us. That's no longer relevant. So, as we said, so in 2015, we came up with the lightest app because the average phone in India, the Android phone, is about $160. That's the price. It's a slightly low-spec phone. And what we said is we'll work with companies like Google to come up with the lightest version of the app, and we were like feeling so great about ourselves. Today, the whole world has changed. We realized all of this over the last year that people don't like to type on the phone because people are not comfortable. They don't, and they make spelling mistakes. They're a bit embarrassed about it, so they want to talk to the phone. So I was sharing earlier this morning, 30+% of searches on search apps is entirely voice-based. Huge adoption of Hindi language on our app. So more than 20% of all new users adopting or downloading the app choose Hindi as a language. We only have one vernacular language today. We're launching a few more in the next few months.
And does your consumption hew to what Shamika showed, the east-west divide? Do you see that in your data?
See, the interesting thing about India, which is very intriguing, is that, and I was sharing these data points this morning as well. In the United States, 10% of users account for 60% of consumption. I think it's some parts of the coast of the United States. In China, 10% of the user base accounts for 45% of consumption. In India, 10% users, 20% consumption. So to actually capture 70% consumption, you have to talk to 400,000 cities, towns, and villages. It's a deep penetration game, but we are very happy to invest behind it because that's the biggest entry barrier. Whoever is able to crack access, digital, physical, affordability for these users, get technology to these users, I think they play the long game.
Rathin, over to you. So I just want you to also, in the course of your thing, just address one thing that Shamika pointed out, which is, for those of us in the business, we know that growth matters. And you've seen all this good stuff that happens as a consequence of growth. Why hasn't it become the single most important political objective?
Okay. First, Shamika's slides of course shows that India has grown exponentially. I'm afraid that in the past 3 years we have a challenge. The decline is at least as fast as the exponential growth. Indian growth has declined from 8% in its peak 4 years ago to under 5% now. The reason that I think, to address your thing head on, because other stuff, I'll talk macro because she's covered, I think, beautifully everything else. The reason that I think it's not an aligned political objective, and when it is, it's a living disaster, is something that I find very difficult to explain to politicians and bureaucrats. That unlike the Home Ministry and unlike the Ministry of External Affairs, the economy in a non-communist country requires more than one actor. Agency of government is limited. And therefore, the push towards growth has to deal with how you're growing and who is doing the growing. And that is something that captures, I think, government concern. So growth is a concern, but I think government, in a sense, a democratic government, and a good democratic government, anticipates who is growing, where the growth is happening, and how it is happening. An incompetent government does not, and across our last 60 years, we've had a variety of both. So, on the macro, what is quite striking is that India's macroeconomic fundamentals have never been stronger despite the decline in growth than they have been in this decade that's just gone by. But it hides certain interesting realities which worry macro policymakers like me. First, let me just say, because I've been speaking in the evening and we've been having a debate about this in the academic literature, I do not think that India's growth rate is underestimated. Google me to find out why. Arvind, of course, does. So I believe the numbers. I don't believe many other numbers, but I do not believe that India's GDP numbers are misestimated any more than anybody else's, because all GDP numbers are an estimate. I do not think there's been a change for the worse in misestimation in the last 5 years. So what underpins strong macroeconomic policy in India is also a unique feature of India's growth story. India has always been aspirationally a country that wishes to grow through exports. It has done that for very few years of my life, and I'm 52. India's growth, unlike China, unlike many others, has come principally through domestic consumption and investment for domestic consumption. A consequence of this, because India's ability to do this frugally and using the resources available within the country is limited, since the country is still a poor country, is that India runs a current account deficit because we are not an export-led country. That current account deficit is financed by capital moving into India, as a result of which you have the potentially paradoxical result, but very understandable, that India now has the third highest level of foreign exchange reserves in the world, but is a current account deficit country. That does not normally happen. And this is why it is happening. So basically what is happening is that the world is investing in India, but we know inductively, whatever the aspirations might have been earlier, that the world is not investing in India to export from India in large measure. The world is investing in India to sell in India. And therefore, the recent slowdown, while a problem, does not have a macroeconomic transmission effect like you would expect to see. On the monetary policy side, India has traditionally been a high inflation economy, and we seem to have succeeded rather well in reducing inflation measured in terms of the consumer price index, that is the price level. And that means that the transmission effect of inflation in terms of investor expectations is very positive. Because what investors don't care about, but I do as an Indian, is, Shamika's slide did this out very well, is the differential and volatile, the differential impact of the volatility of inflation on people, specifically food inflation. So we have fixed the macro problem, but its domestic dimensions continue to trouble us. And the puzzle in macroeconomic management, which is coming up next year when we revise the Monetary Policy Committee, I hope we revise the Monetary Policy Committee's mandate, is how are we going to deal with inflation volatility? Because the orthodox macroeconomic framework of inflation targeting gives you no guidance on that, none at all. So the current account is okay, and therefore our exchange rate, while in my view undesirably overvalued, is stable and not volatile. The fisc is going through a very interesting transformation which actually mirrors Shamika's slides. Let me tell you something very startling, and it should worry the politicians in India. It shouldn't worry investors, because this is what you wanted. And despite not intending it, it has happened. I think it's a good story in the long run, except people have to stop treating the central government as Papa. I measure the size of a government in terms of its total expenditure, whether financed through taxation or borrowing, as a percentage of GDP. Okay, is that clear? All Harvard kids? In 2014, it was 14.6% of GDP. This year, it is 13.2% of GDP. The central government has shrunk by 33% across essentially most of my adult lifetime. Conversely, the governments of India have not shrunk. The governments of India collectively still account for 24% of GDP, which is what they were in 1991 and which is what they were in 1981. Still. So what has increased is the size of the state governments. And this has happened not through design. but through, and this is what I mean by the economy is a cruel master. You cannot run it with a note sheet because there are people involved. So essentially what has happened is that state governments have grown in size and the central government has shrunk in size. This has potentially negative implications if not managed because of the nature of our polity. I'll give you one example, which is really keeping me awake at night, which is India's tax-GDP ratio has begun to fall over the past 3 years, not by design, but because it is falling. And when that happens, then because we share our tax revenues with the centre and the states, because the centre is far more fiscally constrained by the states and is shrinking, it tends to take away money from the states through something called cesses, which are not shareable with the states. You get this cess, that cess. And I think this is our biggest macroeconomic challenge. How do we get people to stop treating the central government as papa? And I'll tell you what I mean by that in finish. So monetary policy is okay, just to recap. The current account is okay. We have a growth slowdown, but our macro is strong. Ideally, a central government in these circumstances should be saying, okay, it is the business of the central government, given especially Shamika's slides, to make sure it regulates well, it does things that don't cost money, but most of all focuses on the three things in India that neither the state government nor the private sector can do. One is debatable, the other two you cannot debate with me. I'm saying in terms of big ticket expenditure, the first is defense, the second is internal security, and the third, debatable, but I don't think anyone else can, is the railways. These are the three principal responsibilities of the government of India. But you find the government of India spending on education, you find it spending on Swachh Bharat, you find it spending on rivers, you find it spending on all sorts of things. And I understand why. Because if I went to my electorate tomorrow, not me, this current Prime Minister, and he said, you know what, I've run a great central government, the states are doing their job, I've given you great defense, I've given you great internal security and great railways, they vote him out. So there's a problem of expectations from central government which is mismatching this transition we are seeing in the fiscal macroeconomics, which I think is our biggest challenge, and both the public policy and business school students here should think about that. My final point is, the problem in India is not therefore the macroeconomy. There are two problems in India which cause the economy to constrain. One is its sociology, and the second is the design of its institutions, which is why a lot of this conference, and that we see is about this.
Oh, but can you explain the sociology point to it?
I can by an example. Would you like me to give an example and explain to you? So I have a thesis which I will not elaborate. There's no time to disagree. That one of India's problems is its failure to produce what Indians earning the minimum wage wish to consume at affordable prices. And the consequence of that, the case I'm taking, is that you end up leaking domestic demand to imports. So growth doesn't happen. So that's textiles. Now textiles is interesting. Reuben, what shirt are you wearing? Is it expensive? Is that expensive shirt? You must wear an expensive shirt to make a lot of money. So his shirt, if it's made in India, would cost about 3,000-4,000 rupees. I hope. I need that example. I'm not wearing that today. Marks and Spencer shirt. 95% made in India, except the fuse collar. A 400 rupee shirt, which you find in Fashion Street or Sarojini Nagar, large numbers of them are made in Bangladesh or Vietnam. Why? So I went personally, I'm a macro guy, but I went with the team to South Gujarat and Tirupur and I said, what's happening here? And they said, there's no margin. I said, there's lots of volume, man. Bangladesh is selling, why can't you need 400 rupee shirts? Tell me. They said, well, our cost of labor is too high. So I said, it's high because you're sitting in Tirupur and South Gujarat. Go to UP and Bihar and make those shirts. You want help, I'll tell you. No, there's no skills there. I said, don't talk nonsense. 20% of your workforce is from UP, Bihar, West Bengal, sitting on your shop floor in Tirupur. You're importing them. They have the skills. Then they said to me, in Hindi, I'll say it in Hindi and translate, they said, नहीं आप समझते नहीं हो, उनका स्वभाव ही कुछ खराब है. Which means something is wrong with their nature there. We can't go and set up businesses there. So I said, but you are happy to have them here? He said, here we control them. They come here, they work for us, have the bad conditions. And just imagine the economic cost. Millions of trains running up and down the country, transporting Bihari labor, not just for agriculture, now for manufacturing also. While we lead demand to Bangladesh and Vietnam. That's an example of sociology.
Shamika, why do you disagree? Just to...
No.
I mean, I'm assuming that you guys have had this debate before, so... Yeah, exactly. So, I'm just trying to stir
You
up
see,
a fight.
apparel is a very, it's very important to understand apparel because it's eventually also it tells you, it gives you an insight into what is fundamentally, structurally.
Exactly.
Right?
Plus, it's where labor gets
See, do
absorbed.
you know that Bangladesh exports more than twice This is Bangladesh, right? I mean, it's like one state, and I'm sure my friends from Bangladesh here will not like that. But you know, that is the size of the economy we're talking about. There are many things that go into making of a shirt, Rathin. Labor is one of them. Do you know the input cost? Because we have such import restrictions on buying polyester, for instance, right? I mean, just the input cost, because of the trade barriers, because of the import substitution, has just become so prohibitively expensive that Indian apparel sector is just not competitive enough. And that's exactly why we keep saying that reforms are very important. Labor is, but remember, labor in India is still quite mobile. You're right. But a lot of no, they are mobile. But what I'm saying is they're not. It's not just labor. It's labor is one part of the problem. It's everything else that goes into it, and input cost. In fact, the only thing, in fact, design is also, it's very easy to get design. It's very, apparel is not that high scale. In fact, right, a lot of the NGO movement of the 80s and 90s, microfinance, they were able to transform all these women into big shop floor, labor in Bangladesh. So that transformation is not very difficult for many states in India. It's the input cost which I think is the true cost.
So let me push, I guess, both of you on this, because technically the Modi government cares deeply about ease of doing business, blah, blah, blah. But the reality is, and I go back to the political issue, which is, for some reason, the political consensus around this does not seem to be evolving at some level, I guess. I don't know. But ease of doing business, I mean, they go by the World Bank rankings. The World Bank ranks 2 cities. They come up with a number which has no reality to anyone actually doing business in India. So, how does one get around this problem? Because, I mean, does anyone actually believe it only takes 26 days to open a business in India? If you actually believe that, you've never been anywhere near business in India. I mean, go for it. I mean, what's your best case hypothesis?
You're making the same mistake that Shamika told you not to make. She just showed you that there's lots of differences across India, and my point is those differences are important. India's growth pattern is unique in one other way, and we have to fix this, which is that growth has happened where the minority of the people live, and then the majority expected to migrate into states like mine. Therefore, obviously, somebody is doing business in India for that growth to have taken place. It is a truism, like saying the government should spend less money and give you the same results, that it should improve the cost of doing business. It does not explain why I can make 4,000 rupee shirts, and that's why we continue to if there's no time, and why I cannot make 400 rupee shirts. So I think the real problem is not this normal whine about land reforms. Of course they're important. I'm not denying that. You also have a structural problem in India, which is a political economy problem, and this is the last barrier. This is the last barrier that we have to resolve. But that chicken comes before the supply side egg. When you can get stuff happening in UP and Bihar, you will get the political consensus to open up business. But as long as you have a situation where the benefits are going to a selective minority of states, which actually, that's what I like about India, very generously cross-subsidize the others, you will not fix this problem. So I think we need to start there and not the supply side.
Okay, Shamika, as a point, Kaylan, if you want to step in on this debate, please do.
Please go ahead.
You know, Rathin meant it in passing, but I think eventually the growth will depend on the institutions.
Correct.
What do we mean by institutions? Well, I think the country has been at war with private enterprise since 2012.
Exactly.
Right? Since 2012, our private investments, in fact, since 2012, our private investments have been declining. A private investment truly is a signal of what kind of confidence people have in the economy. What happened in 2012? Well, it started with the retrospective taxes, right? And it was brought about by Pranab Mukherjee, much against the advice of his own Prime Minister at that point in time, and Chidambaram. Well, we did bring in the retrospective tax. And this is where I think it's important to have an economist view of the economy and not the chartered accountant's view. CAs have a very cash flow view, right? So we did know that retrospective tax will give us this kind of an inflow today. What it did is, in effect, it really scared the investors. It just increased the kind of risk of uncertainty in India just grew, because essentially the new rule that we have made is that the government of India can jack you retrospectively. That is what effectively, and that's what incentives then, they get impacted, number one. 2 years later, at that point, of course, the Supreme Court had suggested not bringing about the retrospective taxes. So that again tells you the psychology behind these reforms, right? But in 2014, the Supreme Court itself brought about another sort of a nail in the coffin, which was basically annulment of the coal allocations of the past 18 years. 18 years is almost a generation. Once the government has allocated coal which is fueling the growth of the economy for almost 20 years, the bank's exposure to the energy sector increased from 0.4% to 25% in 2013, when the Supreme Court basically annulled it because apparently it was the right decision. Well, it might have been the right decision, it was not an intelligent decision. Because what it did do is it really pushed growth back. Millions of jobs were lost. Suddenly you had NPAs on the banks because you had annulled allocation of coal blocks for the last 18 years. Many decisions in the economy were made assuming that these coal allocations are right, because 18 years is a very long period of time. And this is where you want to invoke this difference between the right judgment and intelligent judgment, right?
And at some level the Supreme
Of
Court
course,
needs
there's
to...
also the CSR law. There are many things, which is why I'm saying that the country has been at war.
Yeah, and we haven't gotten to the judiciary not necessarily understand the economic effects of their decisions.